René Clément's 1966 epic war film Is Paris Burning? Paris Brûle-t-il stands as one of the most ambitious Franco-American cinematic collaborations of the post-war era. Adapted from the book of the same name by Larry Collins and Dominique Lapierre, the film dramatizes the liberation of Paris in August 1944, an event that carried not only military importance but also enormous symbolic weight for both the French and the Allied war effort. With its international cast, large-scale battle sequences, and striking cinematography, the film sought to both commemorate and dramatize the moment when the City of Light was saved from Nazi destruction. Yet, despite its grandeur, the film received mixed critical reception, praised for its scale but criticized for narrative and dramatic shortcomings. This review and critique will examine Is Paris Burning? In terms of historical accuracy, narrative structure, performances, cinematography, and overall cultural legacy, ultimately situating the film within both the war film genre and the political context of the 1960s. The film is based on the 1965 book by journalists Collins and Lapierre, which itself was a sweeping account of the liberation of Paris, combining archival research with interviews of surviving participants. At its heart lies a fundamental question: would Adolf Hitler's orders to destroy Paris be carried out, or would the French capital be spared? The book provided an ideal framework for a cinematic adaptation, offering both a dramatic, ticking clock, narrative and a cast of characters ranging from Nazi generals to French resistance leaders and Allied commanders. By the mid-1960s, war epics were a popular cinematic form, often international co-productions designed to draw audiences on both sides of the Atlantic. The Longest Day, 1962, had set the template, with its massive cast, black and white realism, and semi-documentary approach. Is Paris Burning? Clearly followed in that tradition. Paramount Pictures and French backers financed the project, with Clément at the helm and an eclectic cast including Jean-Paul Belmondo, Alain Delon, Simone Signoret, Leslie Caron, Orson Welles, Glenn Ford, and Kirk Douglas. The film was deliberately multilingual. Characters spoke their native languages, with subtitles, a decision that lent authenticity but sometimes hampered dramatic flow for audiences unaccustomed to reading subtitles in mainstream cinema. The narrative structure mirrors the sprawling nature of the events it depicts. Beginning in August 1944, the film establishes the perilous situation. The Allies are advancing through France after D-Day, the resistance is preparing for an uprising in Paris, and Adolf Hitler, voiced in off-screen radio orders, has commanded General Dietrich von Koltitz, played by Gert Frobe, to destroy Paris rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The story unfolds in episodic fashion, jumping between resistance meetings, German headquarters, and Allied planning rooms. Resistance leaders such as Henri Roltingi, played by Bruno Kramer, and Jacques Chaban-Delmas, Claude Dauphin, debate tactics, while figures like General Leclerc, Claude Rich, and Charles de Gaulle, Alain Cuny, represent the Free French forces pushing to reclaim the city. Interwoven are portrayals of everyday Parisians rising up against German troops. This fragmented approach has strengths and weaknesses. On one hand, it captures the multifaceted reality of the liberation, emphasizing that no single person or faction saved Paris. On the other, the film struggles to generate dramatic momentum. Without a central protagonist to anchor the viewer's emotional investment, the film often feels like a mosaic of scenes rather than a coherent drama. The film's sprawling cast includes some of the most recognizable stars of the 1960s, yet the ensemble nature of the project prevents any single performance from dominating. Gert Frobe as General von Koltitz emerges as perhaps the most compelling figure. Frobe, best known to international audiences as Goldfinger in the James Bond series, conveys a complex portrait of a German commander torn between duty and conscience. His portrayal suggests a man not entirely sympathetic to the Nazi cause but bound by military obligation. The film takes some historical liberties here. Historians debate the extent of von Koltitz's resistance to Hitler's orders, but Frobe imbues the role with gravitas. Orson Welles plays Swedish consul Raoul Nordling, who in reality negotiated with von Koltitz to spare Paris. Welles, even in limited screen time, lends an air of diplomacy and gravitas, his booming voice and imposing presence elevating scenes that might otherwise have been exposition-heavy. Jean-Paul Belmondo and Alain Delon, French icons of the new wave, embody resistance fighters, bringing charisma and a touch of youthful romanticism to the partisan struggle. Yet their roles are relatively brief, reminding the viewer that the film privileges breadth over depth. American actors like Kirk Douglas and Glenn Ford appear in smaller roles, largely to market the film internationally. While competent, their contributions feel somewhat tokenistic, reflecting the co-production's need to appeal to U.S. audiences rather than narrative necessity. Overall, the performances succeed in sketching a broad picture but rarely allow for deep character development. The emphasis is on collective action rather than individual psychology, which serves the historical story but undermines emotional engagement. Clement's decision to shoot the film in black and white is one of its most striking features. By the mid-1960s, color had become standard for epics, yet Is Paris Burning? Deliberately invokes the wartime newsreels and photographs familiar to audiences. This stylistic choice roots the film in authenticity and historical memory, aligning it with The Longest Day. The cinematography by Marcel Grignon captures Paris in sweeping, majestic detail. Iconic landmarks, the Seine, the Arc de Triomphe, Notre Dame, are shown in both their grandeur and their vulnerability. The urban combat sequences are particularly well staged, with tanks rumbling through narrow streets and barricades manned by civilians. Clement demonstrates a gift for orchestrating chaos, evoking the look of documentary footage while maintaining cinematic clarity. Yet, for all its visual power, the film sometimes feels more like a historical pageant than a gripping drama. The black and white aesthetic enhances realism but also contributes to a sense of detachment, reinforcing the episodic structure rather than heightening emotional immediacy. The score, composed by Maurice Jarre, combines martial motifs with sweeping orchestrations, at times underlining the grandeur of liberation, at others amplifying tension. Jarre, already acclaimed for his work on Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, and Dr. Zhivago, 1965, imbues the film with a sense of historical importance. However, some critics found the score overly bombastic, contrasting awkwardly with the understated performances and semi-documentary tone. One of the enduring debates about Is Paris Burning? Concerns its historical fidelity. The central tension, Hitler's order to destroy Paris versus von Choltit's decision to disobey, reflects real events, though the film arguably simplifies the complexities. Some historians argue that logistical realities, not just von Choltit's conscience, prevented the destruction. Similarly, the film emphasizes de Gaulle's role in rallying French unity, a perspective aligned with Gaullist politics of the 1960s. The portrayal of the resistance is broadly accurate in depicting both communist and Gaullist factions, though the film glosses over their deep political rivalries. Likewise, American contributions are shown as supportive but secondary, aligning with French national pride in reclaiming their own capital. This balance reflects the Franco-American production and the need to honor both sides' perspectives. Authenticity of setting and language. The decision to allow actors to speak in their native tongues enhances realism, distinguishing the film from more homogenized Hollywood epics. Visual grandeur. The black and white cinematography and large-scale street battles convincingly evoke wartime Paris. Historical breadth. The film successfully conveys the complexity of the liberation as a collective effort, involving resistance fighters, ordinary Parisians, Allied forces, and conflicted German commanders. Weaknesses. Lack of narrative focus. The absence of a central protagonist or emotional throughline makes the film feel diffuse. Audiences may admire the historical sweep but struggle to emotionally invest. Pacing issues. At nearly 3 hours, the film can feel overlong, particularly in its first half, which sets up numerous characters without fully developing them. Political overtones. The film leans toward a Gaullist interpretation of events, elevating de Gaulle's role while minimizing others, which can feel propagandistic. Star overloading. The sheer number of recognizable actors becomes distracting, as viewers are constantly reminded of the cast list rather than the characters themselves. Upon release, Is Paris Burning? Received mixed reviews. Some critics praised its ambition and authenticity, while others lamented its lack of emotional impact. In France, it was celebrated as a patriotic tribute, though some leftist critics criticized its Gaullist slant. Internationally, audiences compared it unfavorably to The Longest Day, which had managed to combine scale with more coherent narrative drive. Nevertheless, the film retains historical significance. For French cinema, it represented a rare large-scale war epic capable of competing with Hollywood productions. For international audiences, it reinforced the symbolic power of Paris and the dramatic stakes of its survival. Today, the film is perhaps less remembered than other World War II epics, but it remains valuable as a cinematic attempt to grapple with one of the war's most emblematic episodes.